Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so glad you are joining me today because this is a topic that we can't have enough episodes. And it's about intuitive eating and breaking up with the diet culture. This is something I work often with clients on because we want to feel and look good. We want to be healthy. We want to look a certain way, and weight plays a big role in how we feel about ourselves. And we have to eat to live. And this is the challenge, that we're around food all of the time. And when I saw my guest's book come out, I thought this is something we need to be talking about and talking about now. So I'm excited she's on the podcast. Evelyn Tribole is the author of 10 books, including co-author of the best-selling Intuitive Eating, a mind-body self-care eating framework, which has given rise to over 200 studies to date. Her newest book is Intuitive Eating for Every Day, 365 Inspirations and Practices. As an international speaker, Evelyn enjoys training health professionals on how to help their clients cultivate a healthy relationship with food, mind, body through the process of intuitive eating. To date, there are over 2,600 certified intuitive eating counselors in 60 countries. The media often seeks Evelyn for her expertise, including New York Times, CNN, NBC's Today Show, MSNBC, Fox News, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Vogue, 10% Happier, and People magazine. Evelyn has the nutrition expert for Good Morning America and a national spokesperson for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics for 6 years. Evelyn qualified for the Olympic trials in her first ever women's marathon in 1984. Although she no longer competes, she is a wicked ping pong player and an avid hiker. I am so excited to have her as a part of the podcast. It was such a connective conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Listen to it on repeat if you need inspiration and motivation to really reconnect to your body, your emotions, your spirit, because it's beyond the eating. And that's what we talk about today. So I hope this is impactful. Share it with a friend, start talking about it in a deeper way. And I hope it's transformative. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. It is sacred space that you're here and you've chosen to take your time to listen to this episode. And I just want to say thank you for being here, Evelyn. She is our guest today. Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, actually.
You have made such a difference in the world by the work you do with intuitive eating, truly. And I know it's taken on kind of, I can imagine, this whole different life of its own, if you will, to break up with the diet culture. And tell me about the journey of even starting this and how you began intuitive.
Yeah, it's amazing because we published the book over 30 years ago in 1995, which means we were working on it in 93. And it basically started because Elise and I, we were co-authors on this book and on the concept. We were separately in private practice and seeing so much suffering. And the way that we were traditionally trained as dietitians wasn't cutting it. And we thought we need to do a different way. So we did a deep analysis of the research. We factored in our clinical experience and also took a look at what's going on just in consumer books, like the one by Hirschman and Munter, Overcoming Overeating, and came up with this concept of intuitive eating. And we got really fortunate because our publisher was enthusiastic about the idea. And they said, we would love for you to turn this manuscript more into a how-to. And so we turned it into 10 principles. And the reason that was so fortuitous, it made it measurable. So we can say intuitive eating was research inspired by all the suffering, not inspired, but having a solution to the suffering. Fast forward to today, we have almost 300 studies on our work showing benefits, especially psychological well-being and so on. And it's such a gratifying way to work with people. And I train health professionals in this process all around the world. So it's just incredibly, incredibly gratifying.
Look at it's done. You have like 2,600 certified, is that right?
Yeah,
Intuitive eating practitioners?
we do in 64 countries. And I think it speaks to the suffering that's going on. And sometimes it takes a while for people to come around to this until it's like, oh my God, I can't live this way anymore. There's got to be another way. So one of the things I say is that diet culture is a source of suffering and intuitive eating is a pathway out of that suffering. You don't need to be suffering because it affects your quality of life in ways that are just, it breaks my heart. Yeah.
Deeply, deeply affects you. If
Yeah.
someone's like, what is intuitive eating? Like, I've heard the term, but what does it really mean?
It's such a good question because it's popular on social media, and that's good news, bad news. The good news, the message is getting out, but it can be also misrepresented. So basically, it's a self-care, self-compassionate mind-body connection in terms of taking care of your body. It includes 10 principles. It's a way of relating and connecting to your body. And what has happened over and over again is that when people are unsatisfied with their body for whatever reason, they start outsourcing their eating decisions to other people, to gurus, experts, influencers, and so on, at the big expense of disrupting trust in themselves. And what we hear over and over again, it's like, intuitive eating sounds wonderful for other people. I don't think my body can do it. And, I'll hear lots of examples. They'll talk about loss of control eating, which does not feel good. But as they're giving me their examples over and over again, it's usually preceded by restriction. And our bodies are wired to survive famine. Famine has existed ever since we've been on this earth. And so your body, in order to get you to eat, you'll get into this loss of control eating. And it's a weird way maybe of looking at it, but your body's actually working. It just doesn't feel good to eat in that particular way. And there's a way that we can move through this. And the difference is, I think I mentioned to you earlier, I love surfing. When a big set comes and you got to go underwater and you hold your breath, sometimes the set is too long. You come up and you hope to God there's not another wave coming. And when you finally get to breathe, it's this big old inhale. It's not a polite, it's a, eh. And no one is saying, oh my God, you have loss of control breathing. You need to get your shit together.
Yes.
We need to have that same perspective when it comes to eating, that when you have been inconsistently eating or not getting enough to eat, your body has a mechanism to get you back into eating. And it's an inhaling of the food. It's normal. Doesn't feel good. It's urgent. Doesn't feel good. But it's the reason our body wants to get us back into normal is to live. Famine has existed ever since we've been on this earth. It's really profound and sad.
It is. I would say I rarely meet someone that has healthy relationship with food or eating. We don't learn how to have a healthy relationship with eating and our bodies and food. Where do we start? Like, this sounds good in theory, but I don't know where to begin.
I want to answer that question, but I also want to validate what you said in terms of it doesn't seem like anyone does. And what I'm seeing over and over again, I'm having second and third generation dieters. Their mother dieted, their grandma dieted. And so what ends up happening when it becomes in your family of origin and it's transmitted down as a value, and then you have a culture that's reinforcing this and reifying certain types of bodies, it's really understandable that you feel so disconnected. I want to normalize that this feels like, how in the world can this be attainable? And what I want to say is, it is. Our body has these amazing mechanisms. Sometimes I call it our body's text messages for letting us know what we need to get into balance. But on a neuroscience level, it's called interoceptive awareness, which is our ability to perceive physical sensations that arise within the body. And many of them we're already familiar with. Like when we have a full bladder, we know what we need to do with that. Hunger and fullness. And every emotion has a physical sensation. And so when you are in touch with that, it's a power treasure trove of getting your needs met, both biologically and psychologically. But when you're at war with your body and you're not trusting the messenger or even listening to the messenger, it can really go awry. But the good news is there's a way out of this. And so you're asking, what are some ways that we can access this? Even though there's 10 principles of intuitive eating, I want to emphasize you don't have to go in any particular order. And often when I'm action question like that, I like to start with the principle of aiming for satisfaction because it is pleasure-based. It is incredibly personal. Ultimately, it's not satisfying to eat past the point of comfortable fullness. And so it is a way that starts to get you into balance. What sounds good? How do you want to feel when you finish? And I've had patients not be able to answer that question because they've been so used to all the rules that in that they've lost their sense of self and what that is. And that's okay. We can get to that point. Sometimes what I will do when someone feels incredibly disconnected, I might start with what I would call the universal attunement question, which goes like this. How do you feel right now? And we answer it one of three ways: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And the reason this is so helpful is our brain naturally organizes this way. It's called hedonic tone. We naturally label like, don't like, neutral. And so whatever the closest is, you answer to that. So I have patients practice that for a little bit. When they start to discover that they are feeling unpleasant, then we can ask, why might that be? And then we can get into psychological needs, biological needs, and so on. So there's many ways to get into this. And what I will say, if this sounds really appealing, but it sounds too scary, if you have a history of trauma, if you have a history of eating disorders, or maybe currently in, then it would be really important to work with your health team on these issues with intuitive eating. Yeah. And it's possible.
Intuitive eating practitioner.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, before we started, you were sharing something personal about your journey of you recently had a diagnosis and you feel like you're on the other side of it. Can you share more about that? And then how has that kind of interwoven with this work you've done?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. So this journey, I call it my truth serum. And that is 3 years ago, I was diagnosed and treated for stage 2 breast cancer. And I was so shocked. Everybody was shocked about this. I just came home from a surf trip and I thought this lump on my breast was actually from hitting my boob on a surfboard when no, it turned out it was cancer. And so I went through the trifecta: chemotherapy, surgery, radiation. And side note, during the chemotherapy, I got so depressed. And I said to my psychologist, I'm not suicidal, but I don't feel like living. And he said to me, Evelyn, you need to find something you look forward to. And so in the throes of, I was too nauseated to lay down, too tired to sit up. This is so wild. I look back at this. I planned a month-long trip to Hawaii to go surfing, having no idea if I'd even be capable of surfing. But what that did, it was my unifying principle in everything I did. When I went into the scary MRI machine, I kept visualizing I'm on a longboard, catching a wave. And when all was said and done, I was so weak. My brother-in-law helped rehab me. He carried my little foamy board. He would push me in to waves. And I'm happy to say I made that trip and I was able to go surfing. And I was mentally prepared for the possibility of not being able to surf. Maybe I would just kayak, or maybe I just would watch sunsets. But to answer the question full circle, how does this impact my work? It is really what I call now my truth serum. I no longer grind. I no longer say yes to things that are going to cause me to be out of balance. And when I say no, I no longer feel guilty. And so intellectually, I already knew these things. You know these things, but I hadn't embodied it yet. And it took this diagnosis, like my life is too precious. My energy is too precious. And I'll tell you an interesting side story to this. So there were a couple of times I had to back out of some projects I really, really wanted to do. And I decided to say why. And I made a vow to myself that I was no longer going to grind. And in order to do this project, I would be in that position and I'm not willing to put myself in that. And I remember sending this email to somebody and I was very worried. And I knew that I thought they're going to be disappointed. They were very understanding, which I felt relieved in. 6 months later, I get an email from the same person. Dear Evelyn, I want to let you know that email had such an impact on me. I just got out of a project for my own health and well-being. Thank you for modeling what saying no can look like. And that, I didn't expect that. So that's my truth serum. So it's closing the door on doing too much and pleasing other people at the expense of not getting my needs met. And so here I am.
Here you
I'm
are.
fully present and living life. And lifing life is what I say.
How does it feel different than before?
I feel so alive. And part of that, surfing has become my passion. And so I surf every chance I can get. I'm in a community of women that are just absolutely amazing. We look after each other and it just gives me an incredible joy. And because that fills me up so much, then that gives me even more energy space to do the work that I do, the work that I absolutely love.
It's like one of the worst moments of your life has been one of the most life-giving.
You're absolutely right. In fact, this is so bizarre. So down to my darkest of despairs, as I was sharing earlier, fast forward 2 years later, I was thinking, my God, and that would never have imagined my life would be where it is right now. In terms of the New York Times chasing us down to do a feature story that eventually got published in a relationship with another surfer, incredibly, I would have never guessed that. So you never know what's around the corner. I just keep pinching myself and I don't take any day for granted. Life is to be cherished.
It's like the precious realization of how precious this life truly is.
Yeah, like Mary Oliver, this one wild life. What are you going to do with it, right? Yeah.
Yes, and
Yeah,
here
I'm going to
you are.
surf and I help people. I'm
You
going to do both.
do. You get to do
Yeah,
both. Your boundary and your time, and I think that is super important. And that has a lot to do with intuitive eating too.
absolutely.
Let's I mean,
Yeah.
how does that tie in together?
It ties in very, very much because if you are too busy, when I say too busy, when you are doing things for the other people at the expense of not getting your needs met, it's really hard to be present to your own needs. It's hard to hear the messages of your body, let alone respond in a timely manner. And in fact, with a lot of patients at the beginning, we start working on self care practices. And thank God today, most people know what self care is, but I would say 20 years ago, I would have to explain what it is. People often thought it's getting bubble baths and getting manicures. And those, you can argue that those are forms of self care with privilege. And the kind of self care I'm talking about is the mundane, getting enough sleep, setting boundaries. If you say yes to a project, what do you need to let go in order to keep that life balance, in order to access? And I'll never forget, I had a patient coming into my office. She was finishing up a phone call and she had this big smile on her face. And she said, I was telling my friend, I'm seeing my nutritionist. And my friend said, what for? And you know what I told her? I said, no, what'd you say? She goes, she's teaching me boundaries. And she goes, Evelyn, that's one of the most significant things in all our work together with intuitive eating is setting the boundaries so I can listen to me. So it's important.
I think it's critical because if I'm so
Yeah.
busy, I'm not connecting to my body. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking the next thing. We're so disconnected.
We're in survival
We're
mode.
in
In
survival
survival.
mode.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so one of the things I want to emphasize too, it's possible that when you're in survival mode, that you're not hearing hunger and it feels like an impossible task. Because intuitive eating also includes our wise mind, we can engage in something that we call nourishment as self-care. That when your hunger cues are offline, because we're biological beings, we do need to be fed. And then the question becomes, what's a kind way that I can nourish my body? What's a kind way I can nourish my body that matches my energy level? Maybe you generally enjoy cooking, but when you are wiped out and doing a million things, that's the last thing you want to do. And sometimes I'll ask my patients, is it the idea of pushing a microwave button sound exhausting? And they go, oh my God, how do you know? And I was like, because I've been there. But that's a bellwether that, okay, we need to do something that has low energy. And that's completely, completely okay. It doesn't make you a bad mother, doesn't make you a bad person, all these other kinds of things. And this is sometimes when we start looking at the rigid rules around eating that are getting in the way of self-care, ironically enough.
It does. Because if you don't have the energy to cook, you're going to go for convenience sometimes, right?
And you can do convenience, and it's totally fine. And you can do convenience and be on a healthier level if you want to. And by the way, I want to emphasize when we do talk about health, we talk about honoring health with gentle nutrition, not beating yourself up. And one of the things that we really like to emphasize is having enough to eat. We are seeing undereating being glorified in our culture. And it's so fascinating to me because last year in 2024, the International Olympic Committee came out with a position statement about something called relative energy deficiency syndrome. And that is when athletes don't get enough to eat, it creates problems in almost every health system. It has an impact on performance, and especially in combination with a low carbohydrate diet. And I remember reading that thinking, my God, my patients train like athletes. This applies to them too. Then we add the issue of something called atypical anorexia, which is basically anorexia for people in larger bodies. It's an example of medical fat phobia. It's really the same diagnosis of anorexia nervosa. It's just as dangerous. So we know from different areas that undereating is really a problem. And we ignore the power of hunger. We ignore the consequence of the undereating. And so when we start talking about honoring your health with gentle nutrition, we're usually talking about what is it that I can add into my eating? What is it that I need in order to have an adequate amount of food, assuming you have access to food and so on?
Yes. It's something when we think of hunger, how would you define hunger? I mean, like some people are like,
Ah,
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm hungry and then it goes away, or I'm hungry and then I binge eat, or I'm hungry, or are you tired? Or you have an emotion?
such a good question. So I do sometimes what I would call a hunger scan, and I describe all the different ways that we can experience hunger. And classically, a lot of people will experience hunger in the stomach, but that's not the only definition of hunger. It's not the only way we experience. So it might be a growling or a rumbling or a stretching, or it might feel like just like an emptiness. It might feel like a void. Or you might not feel anything in your stomach. You might feel it more in terms of a mood shift. I love the term hangry, getting a little edgy or working harder to stay nice and not snapping. Those can be forms of hunger. Having difficulty focusing and concentrating, and on an extreme level, getting lightheaded can also be part of this. Getting sleepy out of nowhere, even though you had enough sleep. These are examples. And so when I'm talking to my patients about this, if they're under high stress, flight, fight, or freeze, the purpose of fight, flight, or freeze, nervous system wise, is survival for our body. And it'd be very inconvenient to be digesting food when you're trying to run from the enemy or fight the enemy. Because what happens is the blood from our digestive system goes to our extremities. And that's why you don't feel hungry during stress. It's a survival mechanism. The problem is we have everyday stress. We're not getting chased by tigers. We're chasing deadlines and those kinds of things. And then I'll have patients say, oh, but when I'm stressed, I eat all the time. And then my question is it that you are eating all the time because you're stressed out and it's a coping mechanism? Or is it that you're saying that you're feeling more biological hunger and it's the other, it's they're stressed out? And then the thing that can end up happening is if because of stress, you're not feeling hungry and you're not eating, and I have a patient say, oh, good for me, I'm not eating. And I'll say, well, what's going to end up happening is when that stress response is over, there's usually a compensatory need to eat even more food. You're not doing anything wrong. It's your body trying to get you back in to balance. And so we look at all these kinds of things. So during this acute stress phase, how can we nourish your body in a kind way that matches your energy? And sometimes I even call it, nutrition 911. What are some easy snacks or easy meals you can throw together or pick up that match your energy level and budget and so on? So there's many, many ways to do this. There's no such thing as a perfect intuitive eater. There's no such thing as pass or fail. It's learning and discovery.
Thank you for the distinction, because I think one of the things I see with clients is emotional eating. Lots of it. Like that's how in childhood, food was a way we came together, or food was acceptable, or it could be opposite. We didn't have food. It could be one of the two. But let's say an emotional eater is they feel like they're trying to soothe their emotions and regulate them somehow with food. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I talk a lot about it, actually. I'd love to. So what's really interesting, there's so many nuances and layers to this. I have a lot of patients that will come in and they'll say, I'm an emotional eater. And I like to look at, why do you say this is so? Because sometimes what I see is that there's under-eating biologically, and then psychologically, there's a restriction. I can't eat these foods. These are not good for me. And so when there's an opportunity, when the restraint is broken, then there is this all or none effect with eating. It's actually not emotion that's driving it. It's the restraint from the biology and the psychology. So I like to look at that. But let's get to the pure emotion that you're talking about. So one of the things I think we need to acknowledge is that we all have emotions when we eat. I get teased in my family because when it's raining, I make soup. That's a comforting thing for me to do. And we want to remove the pejorative that using food to cope is an issue, because for some people, it's the best they can do. Especially when you're a kid. I've seen this a lot with adults I work with. Mom and dad get divorced. The kid is kind of old enough to stay at home, but not really. They're 10, 11, and they're home alone and they're lonely and they start coping with the food. It's the best they can do. They're just a little kid. But then that stays with them as something they do automatically with discomfort and so on. And so what we look at doing is, can we expand that toolbox? I don't want to pathologize what they're doing. I'm not going to take away the food, but can we expand the toolbox? And one of the ways I like to do that is asking a couple of what I call essential questions. What am I feeling right now? And you don't even have to know your exact emotion. This is your area of expertise, Kristen. But I would say, even if you don't know your exact emotion, it helps if you do, but you don't have to. Try out the word uncomfortable. Does that fit? And if it does, yay, let's use it. And then the second question is, what do I need related to this emotion? Because that's a clue in terms of what my needs are. I've had patients say, oh, I've tried all the things. I've tried lighting a candle, blah, 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 da, da, da. And I'll say, but did it match your need at the time? That's usually what the missing issue is. And it takes a while to figure out what this is. And then I would say, for all the people that are working with trauma therapists, you might even ask, what does my nervous system need? That's another question that we can be looking at. So these are the essential questions that we can be seeing. And the other thing I do is looking at, is it also possible that I haven't had enough to eat today? And I've had patients have the perception that I'm eating just fine, Evelyn. What are you talking about? Now, I eat 3 meals and a couple snacks. And I take a look, because I'm a nutritionist, I can do some assessment. And I'll say, well, you're basically having the equivalent of an energy bar for your meals. So yes, you are eating. I have no doubt you are eating, but it's not enough. And so what happens is the undereating biologically combined with the emotion, it becomes really amplified, this intensity to eat and soothe with food. So that's why it's also important to see, are we getting our biological needs met in addition to working on our emotional needs and so on.
I feel like it goes deep too. I had a client that was soothed with milk, like a bottle, for a long
Mhm.
time. And it makes sense then her body would crave that nourishment from milk.
Oh,
And that
yeah.
became kind of her go-to
Yeah.
for comfort was milk. It's
Yeah.
like they got linked together.
Absolutely. It's a learned
Now
response.
yes. How do you see that with clients, and then how do you help them work through that?
So first of all, I like to honor whatever that linkage is, especially when it started in childhood, that we're not going to take this away. We're just going to look at how we can expand. And I think it also depends how that link was formed. If it was formed under duress, under trauma, it's going to be more powerful and it'll be more threatening, the idea of trying to take it away. And so we don't. So if we look at just even the research with Pavlov and his dogs, he showed that it can be a learned response, this paired kind of eating. Ring a bell, give a cookie, ring a bell, give a cookie. And after a while, they salivate just at the ringing of a bell. What's really important to know, there was a part 2 to the study that's often not talked about, and that you can unlearn this response, this conditioned response. So he would ring the bell, no cookie, ring the bell, no cookie, and pretty soon they stop salivating. So what I say to patients is that over time, we can unlearn this conditioning, but you need to know that you are safe, that you feel safe, and that there's other tools that are just as effective. That's the thing. We need to find what those other tools might be. And what I find is if patients have the perception that the tool cannot be eating, it sometimes drives the eating more so because there's this perception that I'm taking it away. And I'll say, no, I'm not taking this away. What I'm asking you to do is, can we experiment with these other things? And if you still want to turn to food, you can still turn to food. Sometimes we look at nuanced things like reactiveness with eating, and looking at, can we put a delay on the response? And we talk about it in session, like maybe 5 minutes. And I'm not saying don't eat the food. I'm saying, can we just delay for 5 minutes for the point of looking at practicing non-reactivity? And if it go eat, but I didn't want to practice the non-reactivity. But there's so many ways through this. And let me also say, from a skill practice standpoint, I'm often usually working with a therapist in conjunction. It's not just me when we're looking at these kinds of issues, because often we're looking at eating disorders when we're looking at this kind of eating.
Yes. There's so many questions I have. Well, the other thing is restrictive, like, oh, I can't have sugar, or, oh, I can't have sweets, or, oh, I can't do potato. I mean, just insert whatever
Yeah.
restriction is.
Yeah.
They think I can't handle that. I can't manage that. So
Yeah.
therefore I'm going to cut it completely out. How do you feel about that? What have you learned over your years?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And often I will have patients say, I'm addicted to that food. And my
Yes. I'm
response
addicted to
is,
sugar. I'm addicted to sweets.
I have no doubt that their experience is really intense. I don't ever question that. But what we need to look at, what are the factors going into this? And when we look at the issue of something called restraint theory, also known by its nickname as what the hell. In fact, I'll never forget reading this theory years ago. And it was kind of boring, restraint, counter-regulatory effect. And I'm kind of getting bleary-eyed. And they go, it's the what the hell effect of eating. I was like, what? That sounds like just my patients. And I went and reread the article in more detail. And what this does is explains that when someone has rules around eating, rigid rules, usually for trying to suppress weight control rate or something will come along and break that restraint. The restraint breaker could be hunger, profound hunger. It could be an emotion. It could be an event, all kinds of things. But when the restraint is broken, it leads to an all or none effect. So it's not that the piece of cake, it's the whole cake. That's part of it. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy when someone says, I can't eat the cake because I lose control. And so the other aspect of this besides restraint theory is an issue called habituation. The area of habituation has to do with novelty. When something is new, it's more exciting. And one of the best ways I've heard it described by a researcher is like falling in love for the first time with somebody. And you hear that person say to you, and it's amazing, it's magical, you're floating on air. And a couple years later, you're into a committed relationship and they say, I love you. And it's nice, but it's not that amazing, exciting feeling. So habituation's been studied in a variety of areas, including food. And so what happens is when someone has rigid rules and they say they can't eat it, they really believe it. And so when they have access to it, they're going to end up having all of it, and they don't habituate. Food stays exciting and scary. And so these are some things that can explain this self-fulfilling prophecy of I can't stop eating when I start eating. Because when you believe you're never, ever, ever, ever going to have it again, then yeah, I'm going to get it all now while I can. Now, if we add hunger to this or inadequate eating, it really amplifies it even more so. And what I would say to those out here listening is that if this sounds like too big of a step to take, we're talking about basically making peace with food, we can really slow this down. We need to make sure that there is adequate eating for the most part. We can work on what I would call a hierarchy of foods, that you have rules that you're not allowed to eat. And we start with the foods that feel the safest or the least threatening. And we build up some positive experiences, like exposure therapy, basically. And then we can move on from there. So it's really, really possible.
I love that, because I think people think, I can't do that, or I'm going to just binge, right?
Yeah.
I hear that makes sense. Like if you restrict, that could be the outcome.
Yeah. It fuels the binging if you restrict biologically
Mm.
or if you restrict psychologically. And then we look at what are the causes and conditions that you might need in order to be willing to start experimenting with this food. Sometimes I'll have patients, we'll do it in session, we'll do a guided eating experience and so on. So it's one of the most exciting parts of intuitive eating. And it's what I see posted most about in social media. You'll see all these pictures of colorful cupcakes and donuts because people are excited. Oh my God, I can have ease with eating this food. And it's exciting, but sometimes it leaves the impression that intuitive eating is just this free for all with eating. And it's like, no, there's 10 principles. They're interrelated. People are just excited and celebrating this aspect because they never thought they could see themselves enjoying food like this. And one of the things you said earlier in the beginning is how food connects us all. And I think it's important to not underestimate that. There was just this week, a new study came out on the happiness indicators of different countries. And what they found is the United States was among the lowest in the countries, and we are the most isolated when it comes to eating. And one of the theories they were proposing is that when we eat with other people, we are in connection. And we know isolation has an impact on mental health. And so what I think about is that people who have anxiety around eating, even if they are eating with somebody, their body is there, but their mind is somewhere else. Their mind is calculating or compensating, which means that they have exited the relationship. And so there's all these different ways that diet culture puts a wedge into our relationships in terms of the impact. And so these are things I'd also be looking at, that food has connection and there's value in that, regardless of what the nutrition is.
And we're lacking connection right now. I think
We are so lacking in that. Yeah.
thirsty for it. I mean,
Yeah.
thirsty at an embodied level. Our bodies are
Right?
thirsty for it.
Yeah.
So it's, how do we feed that in a healthy way
Yeah.
where you feel safe enough to show up and eat a meal with other people?
Yeah. Or even a snack, go out and have an ice cream with somebody or something. That might be actually, that could even be a way to start working on some of the rigid food rules. If you have a rule about I can't eat ice cream, what might it be like if you ate it with somebody who you feel comfortable with as a way to start? And then you get the connection with the individual and you start working on this fear of food at the same time. But if you think about it from a cultural standpoint, in terms of foods are with us in celebration, milestones, so many different things. I think about how sad it would be. I was working with somebody who was reflecting on her wedding, and she was in tears that all she could think about in this case was eating the wedding cake, because leading up to the wedding, she kept refusing all the eating. Didn't eat at the rehearsal dinner, all the traditional things that we see in the United States. And she was in tears. She goes, I should have been so excited about marrying the love of my life. And what I was excited was about eating the wedding cake because I was so deprived. So looking at all the different ways that diet culture has impacted your relationships. And those are things I look at, these sources of suffering. The loss of control eating can be a source of suffering. The not having the connection in relationships, or turning down opportunities to go out with friends because certain foods are involved. Then you're missing out on the emotional connection that we get in being in community.
And you're locked out of the freedom.
Yes.
That's what I feel like. I feel like people want free of all this, what binds them, the fear
Right.
they have, the preoccupations, the intrusive thoughts, the anxieties. We want freedom, like you going out surfing. I just see you on the board and I'm like, there you are, you're free. And there's I know
That's
it's
a great analogy.
It's a metaphor, I think, for what you're sharing and what you're trying to do with intuitive eating is the freedom that can
Yeah.
come. And I do therapy, like love being a therapist because you have the freedom that comes from it. And you surfing is a metaphor for this. I really see that.
Oh my God, that's a great connection. And so the thing I also hear from patients and from people who read the book and just send us DMs and emails is they have an ease not only in their eating, but in their life. And they've got brain space that wasn't there. They didn't realize how much space was being occupied by the constant worrying about what to eat, what not to eat, and worrying about their body and so on and so on. And they get their lives back. So I think between having the brain space and then really getting connected interoceptive awareness wise, there's this groundedness that bleeds into other areas of life that are so profound, so profound. And I'll never forget working with a woman. She was in her 50s and she was crying. I think it was the second session. And she said, Evelyn, I wish to God I would have heard about this so I would have never dieted. And she said, will you please tell everybody my story so no one will be down this path? And she said, honestly, I think if I would have heard it in high school, I would have blown it off. But I really believe maybe by my 20s or 30s, I would have let go of dieting as opposed to being in my 50s working on letting go of dieting. And now I'm seeing women a lot older. And the message is it's never too late. It's never too late to get your life back, all of your life back so that you are thriving.
I say that it's never, ever too late.
Right?
It is. And anytime anyone, because we don't know any different, like that we think the options are dieting or this new thing that we're doing low carb or whatever this du jour is of the diet culture is. And we think, I'll try that. Well, I'll try this. Well, I'll try that. And so what you're saying is we're going to say, okay, I see those options. And here's the option that's actually going to be more long-term and sustainable.
It's a huge difference. And the thing that we don't talk enough about also is the harm and the futility that seeking weight loss through changing your eating and activity actually predicts more weight gain. More weight gain in 66% of the people, and weight cycling. And this weight cycling is when you keep gaining and losing the same amount of weight. It tracks with cardiovascular problems. It tracks with insulin issues, maybe even diabetes. There's all kinds of issues involved that we don't hear about because right now the dominant narrative is about lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. And there are many ways that we can be healthy that have nothing to do with focusing on changing the size of the body. And mental health, as you know, is so important.
I think they're linked. You can't do one without the other.
I completely agree. It's the same coin, different sides.
I
Absolutely.
really believe that to be true.
I do too.
Okay, you've got these 10 principles. And I want to hit the ones that you think are the most important. Like if you would say, hey, these are the most important principles. I know they're all important, but if you had to narrow it down, which ones do you feel like are the most important?
Okay. I would say aiming for satisfaction. I described that earlier as to why. I would say rejecting diet culture, being able to identify and reject diet culture is really, really important because it's so insidious. And this is really hard. It's like having 10 children. You say, you can take 3 with you on the island.
Feel free to just go with whatever. You can name them all if you want to, whatever works.
Well, I think they're all very important.
They're all important.
Yeah. And I think making peace with food, because that gives you the ease with the eating, that between aiming for satisfaction will help put you into balance, and rejecting the diet culture and then making peace with food will get you that ease. But I think making peace with food is probably the scariest of all the principles. Moving your body, kind of straightforward, but then that's just about finding pleasure. Honoring health, gentle nutrition, it's just about what can you add as opposed to be taking away. Respecting your body is a big one. And everyone wants to respect their body, but it's hard. We were not born hating our bodies. It's something we've been socialized into. There's this whole area of study called Bobby Harrow's cycle of socialization that explains how prejudice happens. And you can apply it to many different things, including fat phobia. And that we were raised in a very innocent kind of way, having no hatred of our bodies. And then well-meaning parents and caregivers give us this message. Then it becomes in our institutions, in our healthcare, in our research, and in our policies. And it keeps getting perpetuated unless something happens to disrupt the cycle, whether it's giving new information out and all these other kinds of things. And I find that this one takes a while to work through. I've had patients that love intuitive eating that feel the freedom and the ease, and they'll say, I still hate my body. And I'll say, if this has been a belief and a value system you've had that's gone back to your great-grandparents, it's not something that we let go of right away. As you know, it takes a while to look at what is the impact? Is this serving me? And then sometimes I'll say, is this something you want your kids to be struggling with? So we can work on ending the legacy of diet culture at the kitchen table. Even when you still have your own unresolved issues, we don't need to perpetuate them to our little ones. It's a wonderful aspiration to have.
It truly is. I've had doctors tell clients, well, you just need to use self-control.
Oh my God.
And I want to go, listen here.
I want to smack them.
It gets me going because I'm like, anyways. And then the client's like, yeah, just, I don't have enough self-control. I'm out of control and I can't use restraint. What do you say?
So it's a myth. It's a myth. And it's like saying you need to have self-control about your breathing. It's the same idea. And to me, what it does, I'll be very direct with you and I'm direct with my patients. I'm more diplomatic when I talk directly to a doctor. I would say it really shows their ignorance. What I would say when I have conversations with physicians, I'll say, I hear how you really want to help your patients. But what I want you to know is that they don't want to come in and see you because they don't want to get weighed and they don't want to get the lecture. And how's that going to help in their health in the long run? And now there's this new organization called AWSOM, AWSIM, and it's the Association for Weight Inclusive Medicine. And it's formed by physicians. You don't have to be a physician to join. And I'm so excited about the group. And they are sick of all of this focus on weight. Sometimes, yes, it's helpful to know weight. Like if you're on medication, that has to be dosed based on weight. If you have a congestive heart failure or kidney disease, but for the most part, if you go in with a sore throat, you don't need to get weight.
No.
It disrupts the relationship between you and your doctor. And there's such a short amount of time as it is in general. That's the last thing we need to be talking about. So there's all kinds of things that end up hurting our relationships. And part of it is this weight-centric focus from medicine. There's this whole thing, I don't know if you've heard of the Semmelweis reflex. And it's named after the doctor who discovered hand washing can save lives back in the 17th century. Women were dying. And he thought, let's do this experiment. They wash hands and found out, we save lives. He presented this data to the physicians and they laughed him out of medicine. They said, we're doctors. We don't need to wash our hands, which is kind of funny now because we know how important hand washing is. But back then it was a new idea. So the Semmelweis reflex is named for him to describe what happens when new data come along to refute a popular paradigm, in this case, weight loss. And because it's new, it's met with incredulity. And we see this through history, through science, through medicine, and I think that's what we're seeing. And now we have more players involved where a lot of money is being made with big pharma and so on, and it's really complex. But doctors are humans, scientists are humans, and they're impacted by what's going on in our culture, including diet culture.
So the myth of you just need to use more self-restraint and self-control
is a myth.
It's a myth.
It is a myth.
You want to say that's a myth?
Yeah.
Not true.
Absolutely. It has nothing to do with intellect. It has nothing to do with self-control. And I would say the more stressed your life is and the more layered, the less we have bandwidth to be doing things like that.
You heard it here first. We're debunking this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you need to hear this or replay this, please do and hold tender space for that part that says, well, I should. Those shoulds and the shaming, just listen to this and say, no, that's a myth. That's not true. What do you think of Overeaters Anonymous?
I have mixed feelings about it. And the reason I have mixed feelings is I've had some patients who've been really helped by it. And the ones that have been helped by it is when there's strong community and when they allow the individual to work with their treatment team. And usually that means intuitive eating. That can work really well. Where I've seen it be problematic is when there's this mindset of you have to restrict certain kinds of foods. And I will never forget years ago talking to the president of Overeaters Anonymous. I was at a conference and it was an exhibit space they were in. I think all these meetings were taking place and I wasn't in it. And I was just by myself. And I said, I'm having issues with this. And I explained why. And she said, Evelyn, come over here. And say all the 12 steps were listed. She goes, show me here where it says you can't eat a particular food. And nowhere in there does it say that. And so what I look at if someone is feeling supported by OA is looking at, can we look at who your sponsor is? Are they really helping you? Are they part of diet culture? And can we look at what you're describing as abstinence? Can we do abstinence in a way that's a form of self-care, such as abstaining from weighing yourself or abstaining from dieting, something that is more in that way? So it really depends because as a group of volunteers, what the local community is like. So it really, really depends.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I have one question I love to ask every guest. Because I'm a book lover. What is the most impactful book you've read? And I know this is, again, asking you to pick like your favorite child that has made the biggest difference in your life. And it could be just one that comes to mind. And if it's more than one, that's fine. It doesn't have to be about this topic. It could be about anything that's made like a book that's really spoken to you, helped you see things in a different way?
There's two that come to mind.
Okay.
And I'm a huge book reader. So I think, oh my God, which one?
I know that I have the same. I struggled with this question too.
Yeah. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Begin with the end in mind. That one has had an impact on me. And then Jane Eyre, which is fiction, that it was the first time I ever read a story and what it was like to feel unconditionally loved. That was really new for me. And that just was really, really profound. And then the book by Viktor Frankl, I'm forgetting the name of the title.
Oh, yeah, that's one of mine. Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah. And out of those 3 books, I would read that one first, then 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But when I read Man's Search for Meaning, and I read that because I've saw it cited so many places, it was so profound.
So good.
I read it in a weekend. It was that good. And he talked about how important it is to have a purpose. And I've had patients read that book because I'll say, how is the pursuit of food rules or trying to change your body, how is it impacting or aligning with your purpose? Because usually you don't have the energy to pursue your purpose when you're doing all these other kinds of things. So I would say for now, those are the 3 books.
I love those. And I love how you're just connecting the purpose. If you're focused on this, you can't live out your purpose.
Yeah.
It can be constraining to living out your purpose.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have the energy to do what it might take.
It's
so
true. Okay, Is there anything we did not cover that you feel like is important?
Oh my gosh. I think we had a really, really wonderful conversation and I could talk forever.
I could talk to you forever. I'm like, we could keep going. And I know we're in light of time, but I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Such amazing work in the world. And I want to just leave everyone with this metaphor. I want to just close your eyes, picture yourself on a surfboard. Even if you don't surf, we're going to picture Evelyn, picture yourself on a surfboard and know that it's like riding a wave. This life is like you're going to have something come up and we're going to ride the wave until the wave goes down. It goes back into the shore. And I think that's what we're doing with eating. We're doing with anything that we're trying to deal with emotionally. I just feel like this is such a powerful metaphor. And I love your story.
Oh, thank you.
Really do. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And thanks for being on the Close the Chapter podcast.
Great.
Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, KRISTEN, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.